So for those of you who I haven't met, my name is Carol Ann McGregor. I'm the Vice President, Academic and Dean here at St. Jerome's University. Grateful again to see so many folks in person. We weren't sure what to expect on a snowy night like this, and thanks to everyone who's joining online as well. If this is your very first lecture in Catholic Experience, I wanted to share just a little bit about what the series is. So for over 40 years, the Lectures in Catholic Experience has brought leading scholars and practitioners here to Kitchener-Waterloo to discuss critical and timely issues for the Church and for the world. This year, our theme is Living the Mission on the Margins, and several of the talks in the series encourage us to think about people who might be left behind or to consider topics that get less scholarly attention. Tonight's talk is co-sponsored by the Institute for Religion, Culture, and Societal Futures. We're grateful to have the director of that institute, Sarah Wilkins-Laflamme, with us this evening. She happens to be a frequent co-author of Joel's. And as a sociologist of religion myself, I can say in our very small subfield, the sociology of Catholicism is an even smaller group of scholars. We often lack, particularly in the Canadian context, really nuanced data beyond just the basics of how many people identify as Catholic or how many people attend church. Our speaker tonight, Joel Thiessen, and colleagues are really working to address that gap, and his talk tonight draws from a really rich set of data that I think will be of interest to this audience. But first, let me give Joel a proper introduction. He's actually returning for his second lecture in Catholic Experience. In the 40 years of the series, we haven't had too many people make a repeat appearance, so he's in distinguished company. He's also returning to the Waterloo region. Joel earned his PhD in sociology here and since spent much of his career at the Department of Sociology at Ambrose University in Calgary. Since 2016, he's been the director of the Flourishing Congregations Institute, which researches the Canadian Church, interpreting and sharing data with church leaders across the country. His most recent book, edited with Arch Wong and Mark Chapman, is The Stories Congregations Tell, Flourishing in the Face of Transition and Change, and it really connects both with this scholarly and applied research focus. I won't list all of his books, but many of them are for sale. Our friends from Wordsworth Brooks also made it here in the snow. Some of the recent publications include Signs of Life, Catholic Mainline and Conservative Protestant Congregations in Canada, None of the Above, Non-Religious Identity in the U.S. and Canada, co-authored with Sarah Wilkins-Laflamme, and also the subject of the 2021 Lectures in Catholic Experience talk that you can find on our YouTube channel. He also has recently published this year in 2025 an article in the Review of Religious Research, Planting Seeds, the Catholic Parish in the Religious Transmission Ecosystem. So the sociology of Catholicism is so small that I actually was a peer reviewer for that article. And I thought, whoever wrote this, we really got to invite them for a talk. And so I was delighted that once the blind peer review was lifted and it was confirmed that Joel was the author, that it was Joel who would be coming to give this talk. So I hope you enjoy the talk tonight as much as I enjoyed reading the first version of the paper. Please join me in welcoming Joel Thiessen.
That's great. Thanks, Carol Ann. Thank you all for coming out tonight. This makes me think of a couple of years ago. I was speaking at Acadia Divinity College in the Maritimes, where it also had a massive winter storm that came about. So I don't know if I'm the common denominator and groups need to stop inviting me or what happened, but I was stuck there for a few extra days afterwards. Had a great time. But we recorded my lecture in the basement of the president's house for that one, where they just canceled the in-person gathering. So anyways, thank you for joining tonight, and to those who are joining online, it's a pleasure to be with you. It's great to be back in Waterloo. Great to be back as part of this series. And as you noted, Carol Ann was here a couple of years ago with Sarah as we talked about our book on those who say they have no religion, which you see here on the left-hand side, one of the fastest growing groups in the country, those who say they have no religion. Now, my talk this evening is not altogether disconnected from the larger literature on those who say that they have no religion, though the research that I want to present tonight is a few steps removed from this. As many of you here will likely know, Catholic identity, belief, and behavior is on the decline in Western society, including here in Canada. There are many reasons for this, and I won't go into those today. One resource that I would suggest, and one of the things I want to do this evening is to provide you with different resources if you want to read up further on some of these. But you see the book there titled Mass Exodus by Stephen Bullivant. Bullivant is a Catholic sociologist in England. His work is widely regarded among sociologists of religion as well as Catholic practitioners and so forth. And it provides a really excellent historical and sociological examination into some of the reasons why we've seen and experienced a decline within Catholic context. So that's a bit of a background for some of the things I want to look at today. As Carol Ann mentioned, drawing on my recently published article, Planting Seeds, the Catholic Parish and the Religious Transmission Ecosystem, tonight I want to explore a challenge and an opportunity that many Christian families and parishes face across Canada and elsewhere. And this pertains to the training and retaining of children and teens within one's religious tradition. This is a long-standing interest for sociologists of religion. Of course, local church practitioners have an interest in this. Many parents who hold religion dearly to themselves take this topic quite seriously within the home. And so I want to look at this topic in concert with one another. Sociologists of religion refer to this broad idea as religious transmission, which are efforts to pass on religious identity, belief, behavior, and saliency that a religious group expects members to conform to. Research is clear that parents play the most important role in this process. So we know, for example, from a number of different studies that children are more likely to take on the religious identity, beliefs, behaviors, and saliency found among their parents when both parents, for example, share the same religious faith. This is what Stephen Bullivant and Michael Rhoda refer to as consensus. And this is in the article on the top right-hand side of the screen, religious transmission. If you Google that, it's an excellent article. It's specific to Catholic context. And so there they talk about when you have parents who share the same faith, known as consensus, and other sociologists of religion talk about this as well. That's a really important part for passing on the faith from one generation to the next. They also speak about when parents are modeling, instructing, and dialoguing about the Christian faith within the home, what they talk about as credibility and certainty. When these things happen, you have higher rates of religious transmission from parents to children. So parents play the most important role in this kind of religious transmission ecosystem. As influential as parents are, they are not the only factor to consider. Parents are part of what I call a religious transmission ecosystem that includes churches and schools, peers, the media, and so forth. Surprisingly, few have studied the role that congregations play within this religious transmission ecosystem. Carol Ann McGregor's own research talks about the congregation as the missing middle, this group that we don't actually give a lot of attention to try to understand this link, in this case, between parents and children. And so my focus this evening is primarily on congregations as part of this ecosystem, though I'm going to give a little bit of attention to Catholic schools as well. Of course, when we think about what religious transmission efforts entail in congregations, we must acknowledge that this looks different across Christian traditions, reflective of theology, organizational structures, views on the relationship between religion and other social institutions, as well as demographic and social changes, among other things. That is, congregation-based approaches to religious transmission looks different in a Pentecostal setting versus Anglican or Baptist or Catholic and so forth. And so I want to center my conversation this evening on the Catholic parish as part of the religious transmission ecosystem. So, drawing on case study research along with secondary data from other studies, I will argue the following. That while parents are seen as the central socialization influence in the religious transmission ecosystem, with parishes and Catholic schools playing supportive roles, a perceived problem is that many parents, along with teachers in Catholic schools, are cultural Catholics. And by this, and I borrow from Maureen Day, whose book you see here, refers to those who identify as Catholic yet attend Mass less than monthly. And this phrase, cultural Catholics, is used widely among sociologists of religion. It's not intended to be a normative or a pejorative statement. It's intended to be a descriptive statement to describe some of the attitudes and behaviors and practices among a segment of the Catholic population. As a result of this concern that many parents and teachers within the Catholic school system as being cultural Catholics, as a result of that, parishes seek to reassert their agency as the dominant socialization influence in the religious transmission ecosystem. Just fancy sociological language to mean that churches are trying to play a more prominent role to actually guide this religious transmission process. That includes socializing children, but it also includes re-socializing parents and teachers as well. And yet, as I will argue near the end of my presentation, despite best efforts to help with religious transmission, parish attempts are akin to planting seeds in the face of constraints beyond their control. That is, they'll do everything they possibly can, but there are things beyond the control of local parishes that really you're just hoping that something you do will plant a seed and that something will help it to grow in different places and spaces, in some respects beyond the control of the parish itself, but the parish plays an important role to actually plant those seeds, hopeful that something will take root and grow for both parents and for children. Now, lest you think that I'm simply here to outline all the challenges that parishes confront, and I'm sure we could just sit in a circle and talk about the things that you already know, I want to conclude then at the end of the night by looking at research from other Christian traditions, notably in conservative Protestant contexts, where retention rates are actually higher among children and teens. And I want to offer some considerations for parish leaders to potentially address some of the challenges that are experienced with religious transmission. So that's a little bit of where we'll go this evening. I want to ground my presentation on case study research with St. Paul's Catholic Parish. This is a pseudonym, this is not its real name, a parish in Western Canada. A little bit of context, and then we'll use this as a foil to look at this topic tonight. St. Paul's formed in the early 1980s near the outskirts of a Western Canadian city. Since then, it has blossomed into a multi-ethnic parish with over 4,000 weekly attenders across 6 masses. One of the things, I come from a Protestant context, and so when I speak with Protestant leaders, they'll often talk about megachurches, and Protestant leaders think about themselves as like being the harbinger of megachurches, and I always have to remind them that actually Catholics have the largest churches across the country. So what I'm describing here, of a church of 4,000 attenders across 6 masses, of course doesn't capture all Catholic parishes. But this is more of the norm in some Catholic centers and urban centers than it is in a lot of Protestant contexts even. At St. Paul's, they have 2 full-time priests, along with a part-time vicar, part-time deacon, part-time administrator, and part-time sacrament coordinator. Within its parish boundaries, St. Paul's serves approximately 8,000 Catholic families, in part thanks to a Catholic merger, which I won't go into tonight, but if you look into one of the chapters in the book that Carol Ann mentioned earlier, the stories that congregations tell, talk about the process of a merger that occurred at St. Paul's and how that contributed to some of the ways in which it flourished over the course of time. So it experienced a church merger, it's benefited from immigration growth, plus St. Paul's has 10 Catholic schools within parish boundaries. So all of these factor into some of the dynamics that it confronts in an ongoing way. St. Paul's is not unlike other parishes and urban centers across Canada, and I'll give a few comparative examples without suggesting that every parish is like St. Paul's. I think there are some similarities. You have a few thousand attenders at St. Paul's, and in some urban centers across the country, you find this in many Catholic parishes. There are very few paid staff. We don't have great figures on this in Canada, but if you go back to a book in 2004 by Reginald Bibby titled Restless Churches, in there he gives a comparison of the priest to parishioner ratio. And in Catholic context, it's a 1 to 1,600 ratio. 1 priest for every 1,600 people. Just to put this into comparison and contrast, conservative Protestant settings have about a 1 to 200 ratio. And I'm not saying one's better or worse than another, but to understand how some of the organizational dynamics contribute to what we see take place within congregational life. Other similarities include St. Paul's relying upon its Catholic school ties, and that plays a prominent role in how it sees itself and some of its ministry. It's a multi-ethnic congregation that's associated with immigration. Immigration is one of the central drivers for Catholic communities in the country. This is probably stemming the tide of some of the declines we're seeing in other sectors, so this is a major piece to understand congregational life. And then, of course, a strong emphasis on sacraments. I'll share a little bit about methodology. I won't sort of bore you with those details, but I'm happy to unpack those more later on if you're interested. So between November 2023 and March 2024, our team of 4, which included myself and 3 research assistants, interviewed the parish priest, the sacrament coordinator, the catechesis of the Good Shepherd lead catechist, and assistant principal at one of the 10 Catholic schools within parish boundaries. We also attended 6 masses, 3 catechesis of the Good Shepherd classes, and 6 sacrament sessions. I was actually just thinking this last Sunday on Christ the King Sunday was the first Sunday that we had attended in this particular parish. And so it's interesting as a researcher that those things are always etched in your mind when you spend time with people or in these ethnographic settings. So I can still recall the homily from the priest in that setting on Christ the King Sunday that kind of kicked off our project there. We completed a content analysis of 72 parish bulletins along with websites for the parish and catechesis of the Good Shepherd. And finally, we accessed a few survey questions on religious transmission with nearly 1,400 parishioners at St. Paul's. So I'm going to tie in some of those things over the course of our evening to lay some of the empirical base for some of the arguments that I'll put forward as we proceed through the evening. This will look overwhelming. Don't be overwhelmed. This is all in the article. There's a lot of data in there. But as an introduction to the volume of data that we gathered, the table that you see before you captures how St. Paul's perceives and experiences 3 socialization influences. And you see these noted on the left-hand side. Parents, the parish, and Catholic schools as part of this religious transmission ecosystem. In the table, we see, starting on the left-hand side, how St. Paul's defines each socialization influence's roles. In other words, how does the parish see the role of the parents, the role of the parish, and the role of the school when it comes to religious transmission? And so you see kind of a bullet point list of those roles on the left side. Moving along to the right, we see parish-related initiatives to fulfill these aims in each socialization domain. In other words, what is the parish trying to do to support each of these parts of the religious transmission ecosystem? Then moving further to the right, some of the perceived challenges and constraints in each socialization sector, and I'm going to talk about some of those this evening. And then finally, parish responses to these challenges on the far right-hand side. I don't have time to go to all of these things today. Would direct you to the article, and you can access some of those things there. But I want to focus tonight on the perceived challenges and responses on the right-hand side of this table. Before I do so, I want to provide an overview of data at St. Paul's where parents are seen as primarily responsible for religious transmission with children. I'm going to share a lot of quotations tonight, so you can hear from some of the folks we spoke to, some of the observations, and so forth. But I want to begin with the idea that the parish sees the parents as the most important player within this ecosystem, and that the role of the parish is to come alongside the parents rather than to replace the parents. And so here's what parish priest Father Larry says, and all the names I'll use this evening are pseudonyms. He says, quote, "I sleep well at night because this is not my primary responsibility. This is yours," referring to parents. "The primary education in the faith is the parents and the family. We're there to support and to give the sacraments, and it's the families that are really called to educate in the faith," end quote. For example, Father Larry and others we spoke to believe parents should put their children in sacraments and parish programs. This is part of the parish expectations of parents within that ecosystem, is that actually your job as parents, in part, is to put your children in sacraments and in parish programs. It's for parents to attend those sacrament sessions. I have some funny stories later on about what those experiences were like. And that families should attend Mass and sacraments together. That these things should happen alongside one another. This gets to some of the introductory remarks I made earlier on, that parents should model, instruct, and dialogue with their children about the Catholic faith. This is the presumption that Father Larry brings to the table. And I think from other research that this isn't all too uncommon among faith leaders. Now, Father Larry's sentiment that parents play an important role is echoed by survey data at St. Paul's. A survey completed by those who attend Mass most weeks, where 94% of parents in this parish with children under the age of 18 agree or strongly agree that they teach their children about essential Catholic beliefs and practices. In other words, parents themselves are saying these are things that we are doing within our own homes. And an additional 95% agreeing or strongly agreeing that they strive to lead by example and assist their children in building a relationship with Jesus. Now, these kind of data points are skewed towards those who are attending Mass weekly. In some respects, that's not the central concern for Father Larry and others at the parish. And we'll see that in some of the other data that I'll share this evening. For example, there's a great book in 2016 that Reginald Bibby and Angus Reid released on Canada's Catholics. And within that book, they reveal that 70% of Catholics believe it's important for parents to teach their children religious beliefs. Now, this will include a combination of those who are attending Mass every week, along with those who might attend once or twice a year. So you probably get a closer to truer picture across the Catholic spectrum in terms of involvement of how they think about these things. Now, St. Paul's baptizes around 300 children per year, putting in motion those eligible to continue on to other sacraments. St. Paul sees its role as coming alongside parents as articulated in its weekly bulletin, and you see this on the slide. Quote, "St. Paul's Parish is here to journey with you as you make the commitment to raise your child in the Catholic faith." There's always this emphasis that this is the parent's responsibility. The parish exists to come alongside. Over 80% of those surveyed at St. Paul's believe that they are well supported by the parish to help them form their children's faith. For Father Larry, this means socializing members to conform to what it means to be a practicing Catholic. And here's how he defines this, quote, "Going to Mass on Sunday, giving is also another aspect. Cooperating within the mission of the Church. You want to receive some type of faith formation," end quote. And one of the things that's interesting to me here for Father Larry, and I think you can gather this at a number of different parishes elsewhere, is the ways in which those in leadership attempt to define the boundaries of who's in and who's out. In other words, to be a quote-unquote good Catholic, you should do X, Y, or Z. And in a sense, that's what this quotation is getting at. Father Larry is trying to define the boundaries to say that to be part of us and to pursue sort of this larger goal of religious transmission will be marked by these kinds of behaviors or certain kinds of beliefs, and so forth. I don't have time this evening to go into all the ways that St. Paul seeks to support parents or schools, which I do in the article. But I would just draw your attention to that second column here, looking at the different parish-related initiatives. So they try to help parents, for example, by providing midweek supports for religious transmission at home, homework sheets, if you will, right? That children would bring at home and that parents are expected and encouraged to go through with their children. The parish helps provide peer and adult mentoring opportunities within the local parish. They're highly connected. I won't go as much into detail tonight on this, but they're highly connected with the 10 schools within parish boundaries. And so what that means in concrete terms is the priest is visiting each of the 10 schools on a monthly basis. Now just remember what I mentioned earlier, sort of that 1 to 1,600 ratio. Think about this particular parish, 2 full-time priests, 4,000 weekly attenders. They're also visiting these schools, 10 of them on a monthly basis. They're doing classroom visits and leading classes. They're inviting classes to the parish, giving them a tour of the parish and doing an open Q&A with the priest and with the different classes who are visiting. So these are different ways that they're trying to support and come alongside these other players and actors within the religious transmission ecosystem. So this gives you a bit of a sense of how they're trying to partner in these different ways. What I want to focus on in the remainder of our time together this evening is on a number of different challenges that are experienced and then how they try to respond to those and what that means for religious transmission in this ecosystem. Amidst the different efforts at St. Paul's and elsewhere, I suspect, a central perceived challenge with parish religious transmission efforts are cultural Catholic parents, who again, as Maureen Day defines, are those who identify as Catholic yet attend Mass less than monthly. David, the assistant principal, observes to me, quote, "Come in, here are your sacraments, never see the family again. Never mind the kids, you never see the parents again. This is the uphill battle that we've got," end quote. And this is a really good quotation that captures this recurring refrain that we saw and experienced and heard throughout our case study research, and you see in some of the other data, is that while you might take your children to different catechism classes and so forth, the parents are not necessarily very involved. And this creates a bit of a challenge within this religious transmission ecosystem. Here is what Margaret, the sacrament coordinator, says to us in one of our interviews with her, where she questions parent motivations for baptism. So she says, quote, this is like parents who would come to her, "Can I have my child baptized?" And Margaret responds, "Why?" "Well, because I really want them to go to the Catholic schools." And my answer is no, I'm sorry. What we need from you is some kind of way of ensuring that you're going to raise this child in faith, and it's not just a mockery of the sacrament. A lot of the families, neither parent is Catholic, but in the back of their mind, they're saying, "I just want my kid baptized because my mother will get off my back," end quote. This is not an uncommon response. When you look at the literature, when you sit across from folks who are tied to parish life, those in leadership and so forth, that this seems to be a common refrain. And I think one of the kind of practical questions and implications to arise from this is, what ought a parish to do? Do you take the approach of Margaret, who says, no, actually, here are the boundaries that we draw, and what are the strengths or weaknesses of that approach? Or do you sort of embrace this kind of response, and what are the limitations of that in terms of how the parish operates, in terms of its resources, which are not infinite? How do we sort of measure out these things relative to the different needs that are coming forward at parish life? Responses such as these reveal how St. Paul's grapples with competing subcultural assumptions of what it means to be Catholic. Part of the struggle entails drawing boundaries between insiders and outsiders, and all religious groups do this, okay? Where St. Paul's is at odds with what it perceives to be a dominant perspective among cultural Catholics that favors more autonomy from formal church authority and agency to behave as they wish. And this is not limited just to cultural Catholics. This also exists among those who are sitting in the pews every single week. And we saw this in some of our survey data, for example, among regular Mass attenders, where we learned that parents support children making their own religious choices freely without being influenced by parents. 20% of regular attenders at St. Paul's strongly agreed with that statement. Nearly 25% agreed, so almost half agree that it's fine if my children sort of make these choices freely without parental influence, and another 15% were unsure. In response to these dynamics, those leading religious transmission activities believe that St. Paul's has an invitational posture to cultural Catholics. And this is one of the questions I want us to think about here, is what ought the posture to be in response to these dynamics? So for example, St. Paul's sends notes to families between sacraments, and they say, quote, "Hello, the church is here if you haven't been to Mass in a week or two or more. It's fine to come back. It's time to come home," end quote. It's this kind of invitational posture that says, we're not here to judge you. We just want you to know that we're here and we welcome you here and we'd love to have you back, even if it's been a while since the last sacrament. On the other hand, St. Paul's also draws on different strategies related to kind of a rebuking posture. For instance, in one confirmation class that we attended among many, children and parents were publicly scolded from the front for not attending more regularly, and that those who did not attend at least 4 sessions would not be allowed to receive the sacrament of confirmation. Now, those of you who are teachers who have led different contexts, you can understand sort of this frustration, right? When you have these expectations of those who are supposed to be part of this kind of community, but aren't living up to those expectations, right? You have these moments of frustration and rebuke. And so this is the tension that St. Paul's and I think many other parishes find itself in. With the assumption that cultural Catholics are many, sacraments are a formative opportunity to catechize children and re-catechize parents. Yet St. Paul's is also concerned about cultural Catholics teaching in Catholic schools. David, the assistant principal, shares that, quote, "We still have that generation of people that were like, okay, I was baptized, I got my sacraments, I was raised Catholic. And sometimes when you're coming out of university, it's finding a job and they're hiring. If you're already Catholic, to get your face seen in church a few times, get a priest to sign off on your certificate, these things are known," end quote. The inference is that those who are teaching in the Catholic school system are not necessarily fully Catholic, as defined by some of these leaders in this context. But this isn't just the perception within the school system. This is also the perception that Father Larry raises with us. He says, quote, "When we have them coming for pastoral recommendation, they're supposed to get a letter saying that, yeah, I have a faith plan and I'm Catholic. But how much of that is just to get a job? Or how many of the teachers are going to stay practicing, especially if you define practicing as a weekly churchgoer who is giving to the parish and part of the mission and growing in the faith," end quote. Again, you see the priest defining the boundaries of what it means to be one of us, but you also see the the priest questioning the very process that he's complicit in. That is, in signing off on the documents that sort of feeds back into that system. And I suspect this is not unique here. I think the sense in our conversations that this is happening in a lot of places. They all know it's happening, but what can you really do? Part of addressing this challenge, and part of addressing these challenges associated with cultural Catholics, is strengthened collaboration across the religious transmission ecosystem. Those at St. Paul's highlight some of the perceived obstacles to do so. In other words, if you think about how do we tie the parish and the school and the home closer together, it sounds fantastic on paper, but there are many of obstacles for doing so. And some of the central obstacles that we heard in different ways was that parents, parishes, and schools have a different focus and set of responsibilities specific to their institutional sphere. That is, if I'm a teacher in the Catholic school system, my focus is on what do I need to do within this particular school. And if I'm the priest, one of two, for 4,000 weekly attenders and 8,000 families, my purview and my capacity cannot necessarily handle all that's happening over in the school system and all the initiatives there, along with what's happening in families and so forth. And so this is seen as a central challenge. It's hard to create strong collaboration because each institution is focused on its own institutional space and sphere. And there's more than enough to give attention to within those spaces. There is also a sense that collaboration depends on the willingness, capacity, and skills of each principal, priest, or parent at any given time. In other words, if you have a change of priest in the local parish, it really depends whether this is a priority for that particular priest or not. And it depends on their capacity to do these things. It depends on their relational skills and networking abilities. And likewise, if a principal changes, then part of the culture changes within the local school, et cetera, et cetera. So these kinds of things are difficult to systematize because you have changes in personnel in these different spaces and places. In addition to these obstacles, St. Paul's confronts a series of organizational strains, including no paid youth minister. St. Paul's relies on a university student to lead its youth ministry in a volunteer capacity. One of the leaders that we interviewed, David, the assistant principal, he went to great lengths to comment that St. Paul's and most Catholic parishes are not very good at youth ministry. And one of the reasons he attributes this to is because there isn't any focused paid personnel to actually provide leadership. This is one of the main differences between, say, conservative Protestant settings, that 1 to 200 ratio, versus in Catholic parish contexts. And it's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons why we see higher retention rates among conservative Protestant youth and families, in part tied to youth minister, youth leadership in this regard. Parish size is another challenge for a personalized approach to religious transmission. In the context of baptism, Margaret, the sacrament coordinator, notes that, quote, "If we have the time, we would very much like to have the ability to sit with everybody. When you're doing 8 baptisms a week, it's pretty hard to get that worked into your schedule." Remember that Margaret only works part-time in this capacity. The paperwork alone is enormous for these sacraments. David, the assistant principal, notes that Margaret has her hands full with 300 to 400 receiving sacraments every year. So this is really just it seems crass to say this, but it's like a factory type model. You're just pushing children through every year through the system, that it loses some of the relational capacity because of the sheer size of the parish. One ripple effect of this, and of few paid staff in particular in a large parish, is volunteer dependence. At St. Paul's, 14 volunteers assist with baptism, 10 with reconciliation and First Communion, and 8 assist with confirmation. We saw several of the same volunteers serving in multiple settings, and this is one of the benefits of ethnographic research, is you're hanging out in all these social spaces and you see that numerically you have all these volunteers, but then you find that there's a lot of the same people present in each of these settings. For youth ministry, David laments, quote, "how much we put on them and then we burn them out." In fact, 2 of our interviewed leaders, Margaret and Donna, who leads the Catechesis of the Good Shepherd program, they actually attend different parishes. Part of their objective is to actually train and equip people within St. Paul's, including volunteers, to actually help them into the future. So they're hiring people from other parishes. They're not necessarily embedded in local parish life, part of the challenges and strains that they experience. Low social interaction is another strain at St. Paul's. Most children and parents attend Mass or sacrament classes and then leave immediately, socializing very little with peers and attendants. Even in the sacrament preparation sessions where over 100 attend, children or parents are not separated into smaller groups to meet one another, learn or discuss ideas, or to be mentored. In one of the articles that I put on the screen earlier, by Michael Rhoda and Stephen Bullivant, the one on religious transmission, they argue that one of the key solutions to the religious transmission challenge in Catholic settings is to strengthen community ties with others in the local parish. And this would be another, I would say, central difference, not entirely, but between many Catholic communities and Protestant, and especially conservative Protestant settings, is creating the smaller group settings and opportunities for people to actually get to know one another, to foster different and strengthen social networks and accountability, and so forth. Finally, despite pedagogical efforts to incorporate hands-on, participatory, and relevant learning occasions with families at Mass or in sacrament preparation classes, many consistently appeared bored. Margaret shares this statement from one high school student after the first sacrament for teens class. So this is the student says, "It's just another religion class." To which Margaret replies, "Yes, it is." And this was our observation. We attended many of these sessions as researchers. There's no food, there's no games, there's no socializing at these gatherings. It really just feels like school, only 130 students in a single class. We watched bored students, teens, and parents night after night as they basically socialized with one another while Margaret led the class. So it'd be like me talking right now and you're just talking with the person beside you. That's what these classes were like. We watched this week after week. We saw parents on their cell phones. We saw parents sleeping in the back rows during these sessions. We saw some parents walking in and out mid-session, etc. Now, maybe St. Paul's is the exception to this. I have no idea. My hunch is that it's not. But these are some of the dynamics. And you try to think about, okay, how do we pass on the faith from one generation to the next? What are the kinds of social environments that draw them in? We think about this as educators when we're working with students, right? How do we make the classroom come alive and create active and engaged pedagogical approaches and so forth? All these kinds of things are present. In the end, St. Paul's is keenly aware of the strains it confronts regarding religious transmission with both children and their parents. It comes as little surprise then when Father Larry states the following, quote, "At the end of the day, you're planting seeds on a lot of levels, and you do what you can, and then you see where that goes," end quote. In this planting seeds approach, St. Paul's uses its agency to do what it can via the sacraments and masses to socialize members on what it means to be Catholic and to guide members' spiritual formation. Parish leaders hope these efforts will make a difference, though there is a resignation that they are possibly ill-prepared to confront the uphill constraints of cultural Catholic parents and teachers. So, what does this all mean? Admittedly, a case study with a single Catholic parish does not represent all Catholic parishes. From other research that I don't have time to get into this evening, I doubt the perceptions and experiences at St. Paul's are unique to this parish alone. Building on cultural sociology, St. Paul's differs from cultural Catholics in the cultural assumptions associated with what it means to be Catholic. At its core, St. Paul's, in step with the global Catholic Church and other conservative religions, operate with cultural values of obedience and conformity. Reflecting the transmission model of socialization, I'll share 3 different models here used in the literature. The transmission model of socialization, for St. Paul's, successful religious transmission is unidirectional. It's one way. It goes from members receiving the kinds of beliefs and practices that are handed down by the Catholic Church via parents, parishes, and schools. That is, these different socialization agents, if you will, embody kind of the formal church teachings, and you pass this on, and the receiver should receive it in kind of a transmission, unidirectional, one-way kind of dynamic. However, the transactional model, the second one, or bidirectional processes, where those socialized have agency in the socialization process, also emerges at St. Paul's. When parents are drawn back to the local parish because their children are going through the sacraments. Rather than the socialization process going from the parish or parents or schools onto children, the process funnels back from children to parents. And this is one of the dynamics of cultural Catholics here, is that parents are not necessarily attending regularly, but when it's time to bring my children in for the different catechism classes and so forth, then the parents will re-emerge. And so this is where parishes are thinking about, okay, how do we both socialize children, but at the same time, we're really trying to re-socialize or re-catechize parents at the same time. And in this respect, children are the catalysts for bringing parents back into the fold. In this way, the children who are, in theory, being socialized are also serving as the gateway to re-socialize their parents. But even when this happens, the primary interest for St. Paul's is that parents, like their children, will conform to Catholic teachings and practices. Still another socialization model comes into play at St. Paul's, the transformational model, that acknowledges overlap between parish, parents, and schools. Even here, the transmission model is the aim at St. Paul's. That is, even though school plays a role and parents play a role and the parish plays a role, within this model, parents and schools and teachers, the expectation is that they would each obey and conform to formal Catholic attitudes and behaviors to, in turn, pass on to children. This cultural assumption of obedience and conformity, you kind of see it in the diagram here, that starts with formal Catholic Church teaching, that funnels down to the parish, and then the parish sends it out to parents, to children, and teachers in schools. You kind of see this hierarchical model for thinking about these things. These different approaches to religious transmission creates a kind of cultural clash, particularly between the parish and between cultural Catholics that are seen by leaders here as a central challenge and obstacle for the local parish. The cultural assumption of obedience and conformity clashes with values of individualism, independence, and self-expression, believed to be more prevalent among cultural Catholics. That is, I can be Catholic, but I'm going to selectively embrace the beliefs and practices that I want to. So it doesn't mean that I need to show up to Mass every week, or most weeks, or any week. It doesn't mean that I need to agree with formal Catholic teaching on this item, or this item, or this item, that I can selectively choose these things. And these two worlds clash here. For example, those leading religious transmission efforts must navigate cultural Catholics deviating from these expected institutional norms. And I would just bracket here that this is not distinct to Catholics. This happens among Protestants. An excellent book came out recently from Sam Reimers, a sociologist at Crandall University, that talks about the very same things happening among evangelicals in Canada, whereby they are selectively choosing which beliefs and practices to embrace or reject, all the while identifying with their religious tradition or denomination. These competing subcultural values means that St. Paul's must draw boundaries of what it means to be Catholic. St. Paul's frowns upon cultural Catholics on one hand, so those rebuke tactics, yet they badly want to see cultural Catholics increase their involvement. That invitational posture that says, hey, remember, we're here, we'd love to have you back, come back home. So they're kind of always having to dance this delicate dance between those two ends of the continuum. In the end, St. Paul's is stuck between a rock and a hard place, and I think many parishes are stuck between a rock and a hard place. If the boundaries are too firm, they risk alienating cultural Catholics from becoming active again. And some of my research with Sarah and others who look at those who say they have no religion talks about this very clearly, right? You push too hard, then people will just leave altogether. But they know that sort of this planting seeds approach are not really stemming the tide. They know that even though we're trying to do these few things that might not be as sort of definitive in pushing people out, it's not necessarily drawing in people to become more involved in the local parish. And this is really the conundrum and the challenge that many parishes confront. So, what are the possible ways forward? The challenges and the organizational strains that I've outlined this evening are not insurmountable. Beyond giving attention to each of the challenges that I've just identified, so things like strength and collaboration between parents and parishes and schools, or increasing opportunities for smaller group gatherings and networks and accountability, or finding culturally relevant and pedagogically engaging ways to draw people in, research shows religious transmission is more likely to stick for young people when one or more of the following are present in congregations. And a lot of this comes out of research specifically in evangelical and conservative Protestant settings. And there are many challenges, to be clear. This isn't a theological contention, this is a sociological thing. There's something that's happening within these kinds of settings of the ways in which they do religion, if you will, the ways in which they structure themselves that facilitate the kinds of religious transmission successes that they confront. And to be clear, they're not perfect. When I speak with conservative Protestant settings, they're just as concerned about this topic, and there's other challenges that are distinctive there as well. So here are some things that we learned from the research. Ministry that encourages participatory and experiential engagement. So if you think about the stories earlier on of 130 teens sitting in one room, unidirectional communication, bored out of our minds, lack of focus, etc., this is an opportunity. It's an invitation to think about how do we structure these kinds of settings in ways that encourage participatory and experiential engagement. We confront this as teachers all the time. Right? If you have a class of 50 or 100 or 150 or 200 students, we have to think about how can we create a learning environment that can create more hands-on, active forms of learning. And in essence, those are the kinds of questions and invitations that we bring to parishes here as well, whereby young people are participating in and experiencing the different kinds of opportunities before them. Second, leadership and ownership opportunities. Excellent book up there titled Growing Young. They look at 6 different traits of congregations that have younger people that are part of those congregational spaces. And one of the 6 things that they talk about is a concept of keychain leadership. And keychain leadership is basically the idea that those who are in positions of leadership hold the physical keys to the building. And holding the physical keys represents power. And the question is, who are you passing those keys on to within your parish or congregational space? And the idea here is that as you are training and equipping and empowering leaders and passing those keys on, it actually creates a greater sense of ownership and buy-in, and it helps with retention and so forth. And so there's countless studies that look at those for whom their religion has stuck, if you will, from children to teenagers to young adults into adulthood, that this has been one of a series of variables that we see on the screen here. So this is an important dynamic. Third, service projects. just opportunities to gather around a common interest and to serve together. It's one of the best ways for forming community in congregational life is when you're out and you're serving together in any number of kind of activities. But the fact that you're doing something together, you're learning about the people that you're doing these things in community with. Fourth, camps and mission trips. These are not replacements for ongoing involvement in community life, but camps and mission trips create distinct kinds of experiences and opportunities for young people to solidify and cement some beliefs and practices that in a recurring way becomes a pivotal kind of jumping off point for their own faith development and formation. Fifth, community formation with peers. Like any social group that we're part of, when you are known by others and when you feel loved and cared for, etc., the likelihood of you returning to that group is significantly increased, and particularly at this stage of life. Again, I think about the group of 130 who are gathering on a weekly basis with no real interaction between them. How do we create opportunities that would actually bring more meaningful engagement with one another, that would make it so that you really want to be part of this group? That leaving this group has a greater social cost than remaining within this group. Meaningful relationships with non-parent adult influences and mentors. One of the misconceptions that many have about young people is that they don't want any adult to influence them. The qualifier to that is they don't want their parents to influence them, but they actually want other adult influences in their life. And so how do we create systems and pathways and structures and opportunities for other adults within the local parish to meaningfully become involved in young people's lives, to mentor them, and so forth? Next, formal Christian education or discipleship development. I have no doubt that all these attempts at catechesis are seeking to do the very thing that's spoken of here. And it's doing this in concert with some of the other things that are on the screen that could help strengthen the ability to actually pass these things on from one generation to the next. Serious and honest engagement with contemporary social issues. We know that young people are talking about and thinking about all the contemporary social issues of the day. And so if we don't create a space and place for them to do so in local parish life, then we know they're going to do it elsewhere, and they are doing it elsewhere and having these conversations online, social media, with friends, etc. So providing a space for people to actually ask their questions and to have candid conversations and rigorous conversations with religious leaders is one of the opportunities and invitations where they feel like then that the church, even if it disagrees, if there's a disagreement on where they land on different issues, they know that this is a place that they can have rich and robust and real conversation about such things. And then finally, paid staff to lead children and teen ministry. And I referenced those things earlier as some of the challenge at St. Paul's. All of the things that you see on the screen here are not silver bullets. Don't go from here and just go back to your own parish and say, okay, we need to do these 3 things, and then by next week we're going to have all the problems solved. It's not going to work that way. These things do not happen by accident. They require intentionality. They require strategic thought that helps you identify how do we get from here to there, wherever that is in your own local parish context. Even though these things are more prominent in conservative Protestant settings, my own take, having worked with groups across theological settings, is that there's no reason to believe that Catholic parishes cannot actually get up to speed, so to speak, on some of these things. There are different dynamics in play in terms of the ways in which structures and organizations work and so forth, but I think there's lots to learn from the research that could give us hope and optimism to actually help Catholic parishes in responding to some of these things. All right, last thing I'll say, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A, and there's microphones here, and so you feel free to use those. as Caroline mentioned earlier on, as the director of the Flourishing Congregations Institute, we do a lot of research with congregations across theological sectors across the country. And one of the things that we're trying to do is to provide Canadian data that's useful for Canadian church leaders. And so one of the ways we do that is just to provide a bunch of resources. We're connected with just sharp minds across the country who are gathering data, and we want to provide those resources as far and wide as we can, as freely as available, and so forth. So would encourage you to check out our website and access more resources that, again, we've done a number of studies and connected with other scholars of Catholic parish life. And so you can access those on the QR code. Every couple of weeks, we put out new research from fellow scholars across the country with Canadian-based data. We host 4 or 5 webinars a year, freely available, about half an hour long. We're actually hosting one tomorrow afternoon that you can register for on our website as well, and we have other church training resources. So again, just want to be a resource and a help to local churches and parishes and denominations, so hopefully that would be of value as well. So I think I will stop there, and we'll be happy to open it up for Q&A. So again, there are microphones. Yes, thank you. There are microphones, so feel free to come up if you do have any questions, and that'll be so folks who are live streaming can also hear the questions. And if there aren't questions, that's fine as well. I don't mean to hold you through the snowstorm, and I know there are other pressing concerns, but happy to open up for questions.
Thank you, Joel. So we'll do this for the recording, right? That's why you want them.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
So a couple things. I guess one of the first questions is, did you give these suggestions to Father Larry, and did he listen to you?
There were challenging circumstances in the parish after we've gathered data there. So Father Larry's no longer at this particular parish.
Okay.
But
So-
yes, these are the things we're in conversation with other leaders in the diocese.
So like one of the things you put up on the recommendations, and I think this is part of the movement of the synod as well, right? Synod
Yeah.
and synodality,
Yep,
right?
yep.
So one of the elements of synodality is liturgy, and one is certainly on parish life and how priests are formed and informed. And so part of the question is like, did this parish have a parish council? Like, did it have established sort of lay leadership roles beyond just some of those sacramental positions you saw?
Yeah, and they did. And this actually came about from the merger that I referenced earlier on.
Right.
I didn't go into the details,
Right.
but one of the things is they had a parish council that brought different members from the 2 separate parishes when they came together. So that was a top priority for them, and actively involved in that.
So some of your research seems like, so some of the stuff has come up. Springtide Research, they came out, I can't remember her name, Caroline, I'm sorry. Tricia, right, Bruce? And
Yeah.
she talked a lot about, they want adult mentors and engagement. They want
Yes.
adults to sort of travel. And so that was consistent.
Yeah.
And we work with the Catholic Educators Association, and they've done some work with some Australian Catholic educators.
Yep.
And they, they're really talking what you're doing, so flipping the pyramid from, it used to just be, inform, and then there's some formation, and we hope transformation comes along the way through encounters, but now they flip it. So it's more encounter-based first, it's relational-based, and then the formation comes later because then it has more, it's relational. There's a little more content that can be shared, and people are more apt to sort of listen and sort of sharing it. So,
Yeah.
So the question I had is like, your research reinforces that, like you're finding similar type of things?
Yes, I would say it reinforces that's part of, it's really interesting, like the assistant principal that we interviewed, he often spoke about evangelical churches and schools because they had these evangelical kids who were in the Catholic schools, and he's like, these evangelical kids are all on fire, and what's wrong with all the Catholic ones? And he started scratching away at that. He's like, well, they've got like pizza parties and rock concerts and these small groups and all these kinds of things. Now, the grass is always greener on the other side, but this was his narrative and perception. It was like, we need to do more of those things that feeds into the transformation piece that you've referenced.
And the last thing, it's not a question, I'm really just kind of sharing. So like 25 years ago, I was doing youth ministry.
Yeah.
In the parish that I was also the chaplain in a high school. So I made some nice connections there too. And really the structure for us was spiritual, social, and service.
Yeah.
So we took those 3 areas. We did service every month, and we did social stuff every month, and we did do spiritual formation and tough discussions and that sort of stuff. And I had a strong student leadership team that took a lot of ownership in that sort of way to do it. It's the only way to survive. And I was the first paid person to get that position really in the region. And it's just, you have to get paid. It just validates it. It's just, so anyway, I just reinforced that.
No, thank you. I think all those things are super important for youth ministry. So thank you.
I wanted to just thank you for the talk, because one of my concerns, I'm not from this diocese, I'm from the Archdiocese of Toronto, and they do have paid youth ministers, and last week I volunteered for the Renew Conference, which was planned by OCY, the Office of Catholic Youth, and I saw people from the Diocese of Hamilton come to Toronto because there's not a robust event like that in this diocese, and I wanted you to speak on why youth feel there is an absence and go to another diocese to fill the cup.
Yeah, thank you. This brings me back again to the interview with the same assistant principal that I referenced, and he shared with me that his dream was to fill the hockey arena with Catholics from across the city and across the region and across the province for big conferences and events, etc. And now there are things like that happen in different contexts. I think you'll all be familiar with that. But I think when those opportunities don't exist within different dioceses, this is where you'll see some of these partnering opportunities, especially here in southwestern Ontario when you're I come from Alberta, so this is all relatively close together, right? You can easily go from Hamilton to Toronto and so forth. And so I think those opportunities become more possible and appealing when you don't necessarily have it in one particular diocese to partner in those ways. I can't speak to the particulars of why those things are present or not, other than I think there is a felt need for that among young people. And it speaks to those, like I mentioned, camps and mission trips, and I would say even larger kind of big services or events like that would fit in kind of a similar category. There's this dedicated, set-apart space apart from the normal rituals and rhythms and routines, which are all good, but create a kind of distinctive kind of experiential component. I think there's a strong desire for those as well.
I'm also curious, because you said you come from Alberta. I don't know if you know the organization NET, National Evangelical Teams, where they help. They fundraise and they start up youth ministries like EdgeCore and Life Teen. And I know people who came from Alberta and started one in Toronto, my home parish. And I mean, it was a 9-month investment and commitment.
Sure.
And I don't know how open this diocese is to it. Do you have data? Do you know if they're looking into it? Is it the same demand across the province?
Yeah, great question. I don't have data and I don't have an answer as to whether a certain diocese would or wouldn't, or why not. I would just say at kind of the larger level, and this is not a critique on any particular diocese, but is that these things, to become a priority, need to be prioritized in the ways in which our structures occur, the ways in which we hire, when we kind of identify priorities. And I would say that at least for not just the survival, but I would say the thriving of different organizations, this needs to be part of the priority list of in investing our time, dollars, resources, etc., as one of a series of other priority areas that happens both at the diocese level, down to the parish level, and so forth. And I think, and this isn't distinct to Catholics, this would be across different theological traditions, there's a range of prioritization, I would say, that's given to this area. But I would say sociologically that this needs to be a priority as you think about the sustainability and thriving of different organizations, short and long term.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Joel. I'm adjusting this for a short person. So really fascinating, as usual. I really love hearing about your research. So we heard about religious leaders, we heard about parents, we heard a little bit about teachers. I'm curious about grandparents, because I'm going to make an educated guess that their role is changing, and I was wondering what you had heard or hadn't heard during your field work on that front, because kind of there's two potential kind of trends that might be coming into play, right? On the one hand, most grandparents now are a different generation. They're the baby boom generation. This is typically a generation who's mostly cultural Catholics, like over 2/3 of Catholics, boomers are cultural Catholics, and so aren't the ones exerting that pressure that we might have been used to from our grandparents, who were more actively engaged and to, making sure those baptisms happen and everything happens. But also, on the other hand, there's been a kind of like almost a demographic shift. Like, for example, my grandparents had 12 grandkids, but my parents only have 2. And so in some ways, they have a lot more time and resources for each of their grandkids. And I'm wondering, is that actually leading them to spend more time? They might also be providing more childcare because both parents are working now. And so is that actually kind of, in a flip side, pulling the trend or the role of the grandparent in a different direction? So I was wondering what you had to think, if you had thoughts on that.
Yeah, great question. I think one of the variables in play here is certainly immigration from the global south and east. And I mean, this isn't universally true, but where you have a greater likelihood of multi-generational households, for example. So we certainly saw at Mass, for example, you would have 3 generations who were sitting together. And so even that's that part of modeling, instructing, dialogue, et cetera, where you have the grandparents with the parents, with the grandchildren all together within service. So I think there's definitely an element there. Also, larger family sizes as well, then tied to immigration and some of these pieces as well. I think there's variation across the country, of course, and we know this in terms of different demographics. And I mean, Quebec, we sort of treat, I mean, you're the expert within the room. We look at this in terms of the role of Catholicism within Quebec and cultural Catholics among baby boomers and so forth. And I think there's probably some distinctive elements happening there that may not apply as much in other parts of the country when we talk about Catholic parish life. So I think there are some different dynamics in play among grandparents, whether we're talking about immigrant context, Quebec context, and so forth. Yeah.
Hi. Thanks so much. I just had 2 questions, a little bit related.
Yeah.
And my first question is just if you can explain, is your research in any way like formally, supported or commissioned by a Catholic body, or it's completely independent? So I'm interested in that, if there's going to be any flow back that's
Right.
official.
Yeah.
And secondly, I'm wondering, with the interviews you did, I'm wondering if there was any reflection on the exchange between a relationship between parish disengagement and cultural Catholicism and, bigger scandal or political issues in the church, if there was any critical reflection on that.
Yeah.
And, whether that was at the level of the parish council or any kind of, seeds of people, I don't know, working in any kind of fruitful way holding that. And I don't know if that's maybe what Sean was trying to ask, but it's just like the model you gave is I have to say, it's very stark to me. Like it's familiar, but it's so devoid of a kind of like lay people's critical engagement in any way. And I just wonder if that's just my perception from this, or if that was true to this specific parish model.
Yeah.
That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, great, thank you. The first question in terms of like Catholic funding for these things, this study overall was not funded through the Catholic Diocese or Catholic Church, but we have done a couple studies that have been. The one part of this, the survey research, the diocese had surveyed and had hired our institute to survey members across the diocese. And so we surveyed almost 20,000 parishioners in the diocese across over 60 parishes, a very rare opportunity actually. And this is one of the beautiful things of sort of the Catholic Catholic hierarchy is when the bishop says jump and the priests say, okay, then this Sunday morning you're all sticking around after Mass and you're going to fill out this survey kind of thing, which has all kind of ethical things from a researcher perspective. And so you jump through those hoops. But so that's the one aspect of this. And we are going to do some more moving forward that will actually be Catholic funded. We're going to start a study here over the next 18 months that looks at vocation and calling in a very Catholic specific sense against the backdrop of how we talk about calling and work, if you will, within sort of broader cultural norms within society. So that will be upcoming on that front. As for the second question, certainly careful and critical reflection internally on a number of things related to scandals and the relationship between the Catholic Church and society historically, and both in Canada and globally and so forth. And some are attentive to that as a challenge and dynamic for why cultural Catholics exist, for example, why there are not higher levels of involvement. And there are, at least in this parish and within the diocese, concerted efforts to address some of those things and to take seriously those realities. At the same time, there was a very strong and stark reaction against why cultural Catholics exist, and it was to blame secular culture and society. And this includes a whole suite of things related to the government, to the diminished place of family in society, of morals that have moved further away from more conservative religious values within society, etc. And that was almost the default explanation for why we have all these cultural Catholics out there, was to kind of blame the secular society. But then within that, there was this serious attempt to look at the things that are not right in our own house, so to speak, and how to give attention to some of those things. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you for being such a captive audience, for good questions, and for coming out in the snow tonight. I don't take that. I mean, I did fly out today for you in the snow, but thanks for driving out as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Joel, for a wonderful talk. My name is Peter Meehan. I'm St. Jerome's president. I just want to conclude with a few thank yous and reminders. First of all, thank you, as Joel said, for all of you being out here tonight on a tough night. But our audience at home, we're grateful. Thank you to Courtney and to Patience, who is not able to be with us tonight, but who helped organize this talk, as well as Pam for her hospitality from our local caterer. Thanks to our facilities team who helped set up the space this evening, and of course to Norm Clare and his team from the Unmarketing Group, who are always here to provide for our online services, even dealing with last-minute challenges. Norm, you're always there for us. Soon a recording will be posted to our website. We welcome you to share this with people who you know who are not able to be with us this evening. Finally, this is our last lecture in Catholic Experience for 2025. Please join us for our next talk on January 15th, when we will welcome Dr. Gary Adler, who is Associate Professor at Pennsylvania State University, who will be talking about Catholics in governing, not Catholicism in government, how local government officials manage interactions between religion and the state. Thanks so much, and have a safe drive home. Thank you.